Thank you very much for joining us in this second panel, which is called, as you might have seen, How International and Domestic Hispanic Latinx Students Cope with the Academic and Personal Effects of a Global Pandemic in Texas Tech University. So I will give the floor to Brita Ariston, who will be the moderator of this panel. And please, if at any time you want to ask some questions, feel free to type them on the chat. So Brita, please, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. Well, welcome, and thank you all for joining us for this very timely and necessary conversation. A big thank you to Kent Wilkinson and Gabriel Partida for their work organizing this symposium and for working to promote and recognize Latinx research and creativity at Texas Tech. We're happy to be a part of this. This discussion is entirely the initiative of 3 first-year graduate students in the Spanish program of Classical and Modern Languages and Literatures. I'm here just to introduce and support them. This presentation emerged out of conversations between our graduate cohort about their very valid frustrations with the reality of being a graduate student during a global pandemic. And it came out of their recognition of the many similarities of their experiences, but also the particularities determined in many cases by nationality and by ethnic identity. Cristina Hernandez Oliver came all the way from Spain to join our doctorate program this year due to her interest in border cultures and Chicana poetry. She is already a very driven, meticulous, and insightful researcher. She recently shared with me her undergraduate thesis, which already surpasses often my expectations of a master's thesis. So we are lucky to have her here. Due to visa issues and numerous other obstacles, her journey to Texas and transition to our campus community has been a challenging one, as she will share with you. Veronica Cora Castillo is a Texas Tech graduate and, as one of our most talented undergrads, entered our master's program in Spanish literature and culture this year. She dove right in to building community in our department by inviting featured speakers through our Spanish club, getting involved in our honor society, and even co-organizing a graduate conference. As a Puerto Rican, she has at times erroneously been regarded as an international student and will speak to the particular challenges, such as enforced distance from family, that she has experienced this year. DAKOTA Tucker is also an alum from our undergraduate Spanish program, and I've had the delight of seeing him grow in confidence and begin to own his many talents as he's moved from my undergraduate classroom to our master's program. He is an extremely talented writer, and he merges a very clear understanding of political science with literary analysis. DAKOTA speaks from the perspective of a student who is neither international nor Latinx, but who feels deeply for his classmates and is committed to taking action to improve the collective experience here. Recognizing that we are all implicated in this conversation, he will speak to the role of allyship and solidarity. So, if part of our mission as an HSI is a commitment to Hispanic students' wellness, that begins with truly listening to their experiences. We can take action and shift institutional practices when needed by first centering the voices of students. So that is exactly what we are going to do for the next hour. You'll hear our presenters' personal experiences, as well as testimony gathered from an informal, anonymous survey that they conducted. Their high response rates to the survey and the intensity of what many of their respondents commented indicates the urgency of this conversation. So with that, I will hand it off to the students. Would you all prefer that I share your presentation, or do you want us to make you host so that you can control it?
Whichever works best.
Okay, I'll just go ahead and share the screen then. That'll work. And just let me know when you need a slide change. Here we go. All right, the floor is yours.
Okay, so thank you so much, Brita, for your very intensive, very nice introduction. So as you have already presented all of us and yourself too, we would like to go to the agenda part. So if you will please, okay, thank you. So for all of you to like have a kind of an idea of what we are going to talk today, we have, as you can see in the agenda, we are going first to talk about the differences between Hispanic and Latinx people, just because sometimes people are confused as to what are certain things. For instance, I'm Hispanic, but not Latinx. Then we are going to jump into different policies, referring to the CDC guidelines, the Texas policies, and the TTU approach. And then much of our time is going to be spent on the anonymous testimonies. So we have breaking those down into different categories and topics. Among those, mental health, academics, social interactions, and how family and TTU actions have worked. And then we will do a little exercise in breakout rooms where you will talk about your own experiences throughout the pandemic. And then we will just gather all of that and then talk about what can TTU do for us right now. Thank you.
And then this part is very important to state since from the beginning of this presentation, because sometimes we are not aware of the difference between a Hispanic and a Latinx person, and especially institutionally, it's a very big issue because sometimes our own staff doesn't know how to categorize ourselves. And for example, I know that Cristina had issues when coming here because they wouldn't allow her to mark herself as a Hispanic, even though she comes from Spain. And they wouldn't let her like categorize herself or like check mark the Hispanic part. And it's very important to know what the difference is. So if you can see in this graphic, so Latinos are all of those who come from countries whose language comes from derived Latin origin, right? So for example, Brazilians are Latinos, but they're not Hispanic because they don't speak Spanish. So Hispanic is more towards the countries who have who speak Spanish specifically. So for example, Equatorial Guinea, Spain is included as a Hispanic, but not the Brazilians, of course, because they don't speak Spanish, they speak Portuguese. And then when you say Spanish, it's a very broad concept. So you cannot tell someone that, oh, you're Spanish just because they speak Spanish, because the term Spanish implies that they come from Spain. So you can see who can be categorized both Hispanic and Latino. So you have Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, Puerto Rico, Uruguay, and Venezuela. So you see those countries are in Latin America per se and do speak Spanish. So those can be categorized as both of them, okay?
Vale. So to kind of give a little bit of background to the policies, which we could spend quite a bit of time on. Starting off, we have the CDC guidelines. So basically, when the coronavirus pandemic hit the country, the CDC basically recommended any study abroad, foreign exchange, any international students either like return to their home countries or not be able to enter the United States due to the fear of potentially bringing COVID into the US. With that, like I said, the CDC kind of cut back on study abroad. It cut back on allowing students to enter. If you can actually advance, Dr. Anderson. Regarding Texas Tech's policies for study abroad. As we all know, this past year, the study abroad program has kind of been put on a halt, which is unfortunate but understandable, just keeping in mind the health and safety of our students as well as those of the citizens of the countries with which we would be attending. I believe starting this fall, we are actually opening back up with study abroad. However, that could kind of bring up a couple of issues, because while Texas Tech is allowing students to go abroad, many of these countries are already starting to close their borders. They have curfews, and they're experiencing second larger waves of this pandemic. For example, I know in Spain, the students that are traveling to Seville, you have to go directly to Spain, whereas in the past you could fly from, say, Dallas to London to Spain. You have to go directly to the country that you're going to now, because of all of the travel restrictions and the difficulty with trying to obtain visas and all of that, basically just trying to keep everybody safe. Could you go one more, please? Thank you. Like I said previously, with regard to the ICE guidelines and the CDC guidelines dated back in July, international students were restricted from returning to or remaining in the US if their university courses were fully online. So that kind of brings in with Cristina's journey. She basically had to complete her first semester entirely online from Spain, where there is a large time difference, where it would be here 3 to 5, there you're looking at 9 to almost midnight, getting done with work around 3 in the morning, going to sleep, and then waking up around 6 or 7. With regard to our department and CMLL, I'm not sure about other departments, but I know last fall, one of our required courses was offered on campus in a way that I believe would allow the international students to be able to remain in Texas on campus with that visa, because they had, if nothing else, one course that was on campus, so that way the visa could be issued.
Okay, so as you can all see here, we have an extra from Adam Rogers' article titled "Trump's Coronavirus Policies Don't Tackle the Pandemic," that was published in Wire, that is a online newspaper, on March 11th, 2020. And then if you quickly bear with me while I read this, it says that Asian countries that banned immigration from China earlier this year did seem to slow the progress of the disease, but they were also testing people for infection internally and building on their public health systems. People looking back at other outbreaks, though, like SARS and MERS or Ebola, tend to find that travel bans don't work at all. They especially don't work after community spread of the virus has begun, which it has between people already in the United States. The barn doors open, the horses are in the field somewhere. Also, travel is still okay from the United Kingdom, which not only has sustained COVID-19 infections, including the health minister, but is likely to announce that is moving from a containment phase to delay, which means social distancing and self-isolation of sick people. Their hosts have left their ban too. So with this article, we want also all of you to see that each country has reacted differently regarding the pandemic. But as an European myself, I've noticed some differences. One of them was the a face mask policy, just because I believe it's only in the United States you are allowed to wear whatever covers your nose, not your nose and mouth. Whereas for us, at least in Europe, you are obliged to wear a mask, like a properly issued mask. Otherwise, they can like give you a ticket, or they won't allow you to get outside your home and stuff like that. Also, as Dakota was saying before, I came here to the United States at the very end of December. So something that has been happening and going on with like international students that are flying on and off is that we are, because there has been a huge decrease in people flying, airline companies are adding more stops to our flights. So whereas first at the beginning, I could go from Madrid to Dallas and then from Dallas to Lubbock, so having an international flight and then the domestic one, I was forced, even though I didn't want to, I was forced to go first to London. And then I don't know if you know about airports in England, but Heathrow Airport is the biggest, most crowded one all over England. So I was forced to go there. And the thing is that throughout that period is when they discover a new strain of the COVID virus. So then the problem was that I was forced to go first to London and then they wouldn't allow me to enter the United States just because I was coming from England, even though I didn't like choose that. So that's one thing. And then another thing is that throughout at least Europe and then the rest of the countries, the policies regarding how to take action regarding COVID is changing every 15 days or so. So even people working at federal institutions are pretty much lost, as well as all of us too, just because we don't know if we are planning a trip or we are planning to move out from the country for personal reasons or educational reasons. We don't know what to do, right? Because also other options that they gave me when I was planning at first coming for this fall semester 2020 year was that I had to fly from Madrid to Mexico, and then from Mexico just have my fingers crossed that they will allow me to go to the United States. The issue is that I had to like quarantine myself in Mexico, and so those are loads of costs that I cannot really afford for myself. And then who doesn't tell you that once that you are quarantining yourself in Mexico, the spread of the COVID in Mexico goes worse, and then you are just stuck there for who knows how long, right? So those are some of the issues that has been going on with international students when it comes to flying. And then it is what it is, right? So now moving on to testimonials. We are going first to talk about our own personal experience throughout this pandemic and how it has affected all of us. And then we are going to give you a glimpse on how several anonymous testimonies that we have gathered throughout our survey have point out how all of the community of international and domestic students, both Latinx or Hispanic or both, have been affected, right? So if you could please, okay, thank you. So I'm from Spain. I'm from Sevilla, though, in Spain. And for those of you who do not know, Spain is in Europe and is next to France, because I've encountered students thinking that Spain is part of Mexico, and don't be shocked because I've been even more shocked because of that, right? So as I said before, it has been extremely hard to get to the US and also to TTU as well. First, because I'm crazy enough to just move out from my country in the midst of a pandemic. And second of all, just because it's hard even without a pandemic. One of the very first issues that I encountered was paperwork was a nightmare, just a nightmare. It wasn't bad, it was a nightmare. First, because our paperwork is different. So first I have to get familiar or familiarize myself with all different paperwork, how everything works, how I'm labeled myself, or how should I label myself. in the United States because I'm regarded as an alien, which is a really weird word, but it's a legal word. Also, the time difference, as Dakota was saying, first for my classes, because I will go to bed like at 3, 4 a.m. each day. But that wasn't really an issue for me personally, but just because I'm used to that. But it was also more when I had to send emails or schedule a meeting with someone, then it would be horrible just because each of us were very like busy. And then 7 or 8 hours of time difference is very big. Also, as I said before, the flights kept changing all the time. So I wasn't sure if I could fly on December, or if I should fly on January next year, or if I should have to like take another online class semester. With being said that if I'm taking online classes from Spain, I cannot work for the university as a GPTI or a TA. So I'm not getting nor the experience nor the money that I need to like finance myself. So that was extremely hard. And then another issue is that you can book a flight and then think that you are pretty much done. But then what happens is that 3 days before flying, they tell you that you have 2 different new stops, and then you have just to bear all the consequences. And then once something that can happen, that is something that happened to me too, is that, for instance, when I was in England, even though I had my visa, I had all my paperwork fine, they were like, no, if you don't have a green card, then you are not allowed in the country, which doesn't make any sense because the embassy, the American embassy, allowed me to go as an international graduate student, right? So they were calling even the embassy, which was very embarrassing to me, but they just wanted to make sure. So all of those tiny little things it took me almost more than 35 hours to arrive here, which was a nightmare. So yeah, thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for sharing your experience, Christina. And what in regards for me as a Puerto Rican student, living here in the continental U.S., it was very hard just coming here when I came here in 2018 to Texas Tech because, as I said in the beginning, they didn't know how to classify me as regarding as a student. They didn't know if I was an international student or a domestic student, even though Puerto Rico is part of the states in 1917. It's in 1898, and we have been U.S. citizens since 1917. And they just had a battle with me to whether classify me as an international student or a domestic student, and they had me going back and forth to the international student office. And so that's just an experience that's always going to be with me, and it's very not embarrassing, but like it's shocking and it's upsetting because they didn't know where to put me. Like they just didn't know how to classify me. Like you're just like you're a weird limbo status. And then during the pandemic, so for me, I wanted to visit my family because I finally had the time and the money to go visit home since I came here in 2017. And I couldn't because Puerto Rico had one of the most restrictive policies in all of the U.S. with the former governor. And for going into the island, you had to have your PCR testing. You had to have a bunch of like paperwork and all this, and they weren't allowing a lot of people in just in general. And if you went out of Texas, there were a lot of restrictions in Texas that wouldn't let you come into Texas then. And so I couldn't just leave and go with my family, which is like, it's a good thing for the Puerto Rican population because it contains the spread of the virus. But at the same time, it prevented me from like going home and see my family. I haven't seen my family in 4 years. And when I finally had the time and the money to go visit, I couldn't because we were in the midst of a pandemic, right? And I just think that we need to educate more our staff in general in school, because there's a lot of issues with in regards of Hispanic and Latinx students, and just how they are treated, and their how they're categorized in general in the school. And for being a Hispanic serving institution, I find like a lot of issues with how staff and in general like treats and handles the issues with Hispanic students. Another example is when you're doing your FAFSA. So I filled my FAFSA and all that, and I went to the revision status, and I had to go to the office and bring my parents' tax returns and all that. And I was using my mom's, which is from Puerto Rico, and they were like, "This is in Spanish. We cannot accept this." First of all, and second of all, you need to convert the money from pesos to dollars. And I looked at the lady. I'm like, Puerto Rico is part of the States and it uses US currency. So what do you mean? I don't have to convert anything. It's already in dollars. So it was very shocking that nobody knew like that Puerto Rico is part of the States, that we do speak Spanish, but we do have like our official government documents are in both in Spanish and in English. But it was just all this constant shock of like people wouldn't understand like how that Puerto Rico US relationship works. And that's kind of my experience here coming to Texas Tech.
So as previously stated, I am neither Hispanic nor Latinx. However, being in the graduate program that I am, I have been introduced to several international and domestic, obviously Hispanic Latinx students. One of the biggest things that I noticed at first was the fact that Cristina was still in Spain and wasn't able to get here. So with our the class that I mentioned previously that we had online last semester, our professor basically made a rotation. So each of us were on Zoom with her. That way, as far as like participating in breakout rooms or activities or anything to be done in groups, she could have somebody to work with. But the biggest thing I noticed was just how difficult it was for the international students and even for domestic students like Veronica, who is from Puerto Rico, how difficult it was and still is to be able to get home to see their families. And I mean, it's been 4 years since Veronica's seen her family. And like she said, as soon as she had the opportunity, she couldn't because of all the restrictions that have been put into place. And even just like the difficulties with trying to obtain the visas or things like that. It's just been a trying time for all of us. Not only, at least for me, starting graduate school, but starting graduate school during the middle of a global pandemic. Everything's just kind of turned up on its head, if you will. And yeah, I know, at least for me, just seeing how it's affected my peers, it's really difficult to kind of to process. Even for me, like I have the ability to be able to go home because I'm from Texas and my home is only 4.5 hours away, but those who are all the way across the ocean or down in Mexico or something like that, it's very difficult to be able to get back. If you would actually advance, Dr. Anderson, thank you. So now we're kind of going to dive into some of the responses that we received from our survey. So we actually received a total of 30 responses from Texas Tech students, both international, domestic, Hispanic, Latinx. We have selected some of those excerpts and like we said, divided them into various topics that were very prominent that came up in the responses. Would you advance one more, please? Thank you. So starting off, the one to me that hit the hardest was mental health. to see some of these responses, I didn't know what to expect, but I wasn't expecting to read some of the things that I read. I mean, simple enough, my entire schedule and routine were disrupted, which has been rough on my mental health. Going on, the pandemic has affected me greatly during this first year. Besides recovering from several hospitalizations during high school, the added weight of the pandemic and moving far away has made my education plummet much more than if there were not a pandemic. Being unable to interact with many other students also had a negative impact on my mental health in general. Some students were falling into depression and just losing interest in their classes and just feeling disconnected, which is a very real thing because everything's online and it's very hard to feel like you're a part of something and feel like you're doing something well because you're a picture on a screen, right? Someone else, I have felt like a number in a simple workforce since the pandemic began, starting by the email sent by International Affairs at the beginning, as well as international advisors where they were just talking about how we could lose our status if leaving the country and just asking us to obtain permission from our departments in order to leave. And that kind of goes back to the guidelines and just the difficulties surrounding being an international student in the US, how hard it is to be able to have everything come into play and to kind of realize, oh, well, this is what's going on, but wait, I can't do this, or I can't leave with fear that I won't be able to come back. If you could advance one more. Somebody else said that they had COVID during the summer, so it luckily didn't impact their studies directly. However, I believe I experienced heightened anxiety about returning to in-person classes. And even when I was remote for fall, I was anxious about getting myself or others sick, which is a very real thing. It's convenient that everything was offered online, but at the same time, that doesn't make the pandemic go away. COVID school has taken everything out of me. I do not know mentally how much more I can take. The well-being of students just got pushed to the back burner. It is more important just to turn in all these assignments, and they also had to quit their job because school became too consuming. Not having sufficient time off like a spring break has made it tough. I feel a little overwhelmed and like I can't catch up with every assignment. And I wholeheartedly agree with that, just because I know spring break is a much needed thing for graduate students and even professors and instructors, just to have that little bit of a break from classes to be able to take a breath before we get back into the more consuming things, like as we're getting to the end of the semester, writing final papers, doing presentations, all that kind of fun stuff. Okay, so this one's a little long, so bear with me. COVID-19 was weird, and I believe it was a different time for everyone. The way that things were handled from the very top at the level of the government was rather embarrassing, to say the least, as the USA is seen as one of the most prominent countries in all of the world. For me personally, I lost focus, I lost drive, I lost will to do things that I used to love to do. I lost the care for school and the drive to make sure everything was completely completed, solely because most classes were going at your own pace and watching lectures on your own time and completing all of your assignments online. I have never been a very great online student. And with the switch to online in March 2020, it was all downhill from there. I felt down most times because I didn't get to get out and walk around and do things. And it was just hard to make myself sit there and actually focus on school when the world was in such a weird state and no one really knew what was going on or what would come out of this. Because of COVID-19, my academics definitely declined, and now I'm trying to climb my way back up. And I feel like a lot of people have had this same feeling. Maybe not been able to put it into words, but that kind of stuck with me. Can you go back, please? Sorry. I felt down most times because I couldn't get out to walk or do things. And it was hard to make myself sit there and actually focus on school. At least for me personally, having my desk and my computer right next to my bed, it's difficult to make that distinction, to be able to, okay, I'm in school mode, I need to do this. Whereas in a normal semester, you could go to the library, you could go here, you could go there, interact with people, talk with people, do what you needed to do. But with COVID and the effect on mental health, it's very just, it's, I don't know how to put it into words other than saying it's just an extremely weird time. And I feel like that's one thing that we're really hasn't been discussed a lot. And so that's why we're trying to highlight it now, is the effect that this pandemic has had on students and their mental health, because it has simply declined greatly. So.
As for the academic part, I feel like this is a very important part, because your mental health, it's going to affect your academic part. If you cannot concentrate and do your work, it's going to decline. And some of the responses here were very shocking, and you'll see why. We were not expecting such feedback from students, like this harsh and contrasting feedback. I'm gonna go ahead and start reading the quotes. The pandemic has affected me greatly during my first year of college. Besides recovering from several hospitalizations during high school, the added weight of the pandemic and moving far away has made my education plummet more than if there were not a pandemic. Being unable to interact with many other students has also had a negative impact on my mental health in general. And this is a quote that we had before, but I feel like it was very interesting because this is a first year student, and it didn't only affect them mentally, but just that transition from high school to college is hard enough. Imagine doing it during a pandemic and going directly to online classes and not having no interaction with your classmates, your friends, or anything. So it's very, like, it was a very impacting quote. The next quote says, "Yes, I had COVID during the summer, so it did impact my studies directly. However, I believe I experienced heightened anxiety about returning to in-person classes, and even when I was remote for the fall semester, I was anxious about getting myself or others sick." Another quote says, "It has been hard keeping up with classes. Maintaining homework has been very difficult." And I feel like that's kind of the recurring feeling between all these quotes is students are tired. Students are not adjusting well to online classes in general, and are feeling like handling a pandemic in classes at the same time is very hard. I have been impacted academically due to having classes online, which feels like I don't learn as much as in-class persons. It's been a bit more difficult to keep up with schoolwork when it comes to online classes. Learning has also become a longer process. And that's something that I noticed from classes, that a lot of them had to reinvent the class to an online mode, and made like a lot more material, since they don't get to meet in person. You have to do a lot of more like little tasks, and that gets exhausting. Having to do this little mini tasks over and over every day, it gets exhausting, because you know you always know you have something to do the next day, you know? Academically, I was not able to focus on my research for a year due to the constant pressure that was installed. Whereas an international student, it seemed that you had to choose between your PhD or your family. Personally, I thought about quitting my PhD, and that's a hard decision, because getting into a PhD program is hard enough. Imagine having to decide between your PhD and your family. It's incredible just to hear these testimonials from our students. Social life has been non-existent, and this is something that I feel a lot of us can relate. Just the mere isolation that we've been through, and a big part of like the college experience, especially for freshmen when they come in, is going out, being free, because now you don't have parents and you don't have supervision. You can go out, you can not drink because you're underage, but you know, you get the feeling, like go out, party, and all this. And it's something that a lot of students have lacked that experience. Or if they're finally 21 and they wanted to go out and party and have a good time, they can't do that either, because the bars were closed and they were limiting the people that were inside. And it's just been a very hard time to like meet new people, socially interact, and have that feeling of community. They should have cracked down on parties and large gatherings that were held by associations with ties to the university, i.e. Greek life, and had some form of accountability for students who refused to follow state and federal guidelines both on and off campus. And this is a very big deal because I feel that Texas Tech did not do much on this part. I did hear about a lot of parties that they had, and they had games and stuff, even in the midst of a pandemic. I feel like sports can wait. The health of your athletes and your students is way more important than a football game, honestly. This is currently my first year living in Lubbock, and COVID has affected me in ways that it's hard for me to make friends, join clubs, and have live classes.
Also, I wanted to point out that all of us who are also part of we are also teaching here, part-time, full-time, it doesn't really matter. Something that we are all going to notice, or I've already noticed in all of my classes, is that when it comes to social interactions first, because as Veronica was saying before, maybe they are first-year students, so they know no one. And so they are coping with loads of isolation and not being able to create or like to bond with people. Another issue is that if you like to do group work in your classes, you are going to notice that people don't know how to interact. Like people have forgotten how to socialize. So even among my students, whenever whenever they are trying to introduce each other or they are doing teamwork, they are really awkward. And this is something that I think is going to make us all go backwards, in the sense that because right now we are almost reaching a second year of the pandemic, and people don't know how to socialize. People feel now awkward if you have to go grocery shopping, or if you have to like just meet someone new. You don't know how to react. You don't know how to move your body. You don't know what to say. And I think this is something that we are unfortunately losing. And that now thinking that all these people now being being first year students or sophomores or seniors, these are the people that are going to go to to society once they finish studying, right? So this is the type of people that now will drive the country, and they don't know how to interact, right? So I think this is a very important part also of the school. And then there are also more testimonies regarding this. So there was this also that said, okay, there was also this that said, yes, both coming out of high school and going to college for the first time has been very challenging with COVID-19. I missed the end of my schooling as a senior and received an online graduation. With most of our students also feel that it's a really great loss, because they, since the first time they get into a school or high school, they are always all thinking about their graduation. And now as a freshman in tech, the entire experience has been an odd shift from normalcy. And the social aspect is the hardest, to meet new people and make those connections. Plus the learning style has been greatly influenced as well. And this is something that I think is most important for either domestic students that are moving out from their house or hometowns, or for international students that are coming here and they know nothing nor no one. So those are also things that have a great impact on the mental health. And then as for the family aspect, all of you have also seen this before with Veronica, but is the issue that there has been people that has been both academic and personally impacted with all the COVID, and that people also at some point need to balance. All of us in grad school or even like in the undergrad, we have to balance our family and our academic life. And with the pandemic, that balance has been off all the time. And so that's why there has been people saying, I may have to quit my job, or I may have to quit my my school life just because I have to prioritize something, and if I have to prioritize something, it's going to be my family, right? So we have this testimony that said, academic and personally, there is a high impact, especially when you are pursuing a PhD and raising kids. Library resources are limited, and kids are attending school at home virtually. You just get tired by the middle of the day and don't see the expected progress. Is really frustrating, right? And these type of things that end up becoming people start getting anxious, people get starting depressed, and that's how everything begins, right? Okay, I guess I continue. As for the Texas Tech actions that we were asking our students, there has been also a great bunch of answers to that question. And so people they want to feel safer in TTU campus, and they just ask for more precautions and implementing more cleaning and social distancing policies. There it's not everything bad. There are also students that have said that professors have been very understanding and more flexible with deadlines and with the lack of interest that students are now coping with. Also, some other people said that that is not something they didn't feel supported by TTU as an institution, but by just individual professors in their own classes. Right, and if Rita, could you please okay. So also some people have said that the enforcement of online courses have been pretty much handled, in the sense that it has been outstanding the way we have switched from in-person classes to online classes, even though the busy work, as Vero was mentioning before, can be overwhelming and can cause that lots of students feel that they cannot separate their private lives from their school lives. Yeah, that's pretty much everything there. So if you could, okay.
And I've sent a link on the chat where y'all can open a document, and we want to have a little breakout room. I don't know if Britta can do that from her computer, and you can separate it as many groups as you want. You understand it will be doable. And it's just in this document, you're going to find the 2 questions that we did in the survey, and we just want to have your opinion as our audience. And having heard all the opinions from the students that answered our survey, we just want to get a general idea of what do you think Texas Tech has done for you as a student, as a professor, as a member of the community.
Great.
Yes.
Well, welcome back. Thank you so much to Dakota, Christina, and Veronica for sharing their experiences and for taking the initiative to organize this survey, to gather this testimony, and to make this conversation public. I think these are experiences that we all need to recognize and address. And thank you to all of you for sticking with us and for engaging in the breakout room. Puts you in the position of student for a moment there. Dakota mentioned to me this idea of using this document and an ideal outcome of this conversation being kind of a call to action, and even something that we could present to administration as specific actions that would make a difference as this pandemic continues impacting the life of students. So I'll go ahead and open it up to however the students want to organize it. I think we can both, for the remaining 15 minutes, take questions and also share feedback from what came out of your conversations with one another. Does that sound good?
Yeah, if you can roll to the next slide. I have like a slide just for the call for action that we want to make. What we talked about in our breakout rooms, we can now talk about it as a full group. So anything that y'all want to add to our conversation, it will be great. And if you had the chance to add it to the Google Doc, then we can of course make something about it and just communicate it to to the institution, and how they could better the situation for us as students, as faculty, and just dealing with the pandemic, you know? Anyone wants to talk?
You can add to the chat. You're also welcome to unmute yourself and go ahead and speak. To kick it off, though, I have one question for the group, which is just what would you most want your professors to know as the largest takeaway from all of this and about your experiences? And I think a lot of us as faculty are looking at how to try to balance how to maintain high expectations of our academics and how to implement practices that do take into account the reality of what this year has been and the mental toll of it all. So what message would you most like your professors to get out of all of this?
Well, at least for me, academically, I kind of hate the busy work, the little task, because it's just that constant worry that I have something to do the next day. And it's like those little things you have to do each day. Just having maybe like a format and a constant deadline. For example, if your class is on Tuesdays at 5, just know that by 5 o'clock on Tuesday, that's the deadline for everything else, and not changing those deadlines, because oh my God. I personally am like Dory from Finding Nemo. I have short-term memory. I forget everything. And if you keep changing the deadlines for me, I will forget. And I have missed deadlines because I cannot remember all the dates. I just can't.
Especially if they change them like after you write them in a planner.
Yeah, like if it's for an extension, because as a professor, you understand you haven't given enough time, I get it, perfect. But just having this little constant amidst this brag that the pandemic has made to us, I feel like that would be very helpful.
Yeah, Veronica, that's something I actually learned from teaching online classes before the pandemic hit, because some students said, hey, could you make it consistent, like, every Friday at, 5 or midnight or whatever, because we've got all these other classes and it is hard to keep track of. So I think that's really good advice. And, it's good that students are, vocal in terms of giving that feedback, whether it's face-to-face or on the evaluation at the end of the semester. While I've got the mic, one thing I wanted to mention is that Dr. Kathy Duran, who was on here earlier, she signed off saying she had to go. She's pretty high up in the Division of Student Affairs, so I think she'd be a really good contact person for you to get some feedback on this session from and send the results to, because she's empathetic. She's been a participant in these symposia in years past, and is involved in some other initiatives related to not only diversity, equity, and inclusion, but just trying to improve the environment for students. I think it's good that you're being vocal and that you're being rather assertive, and I think she would be a good contact in the administration to sort of get that conversation going with.
Thank you. I think Carlos Portillo wanted to say something.
Please.
I do want to say something, but I guess okay. So not related to that. I mean I guess the perspective from the student, but I've been listening. I'm also a faculty here, and I've been listening to you guys. And one of the things that that I think can be done from the faculty side, and I don't know if you guys agree. I mean, if the last year and this year has been, so strange, and it's been really dry. I mean, some professors has been really dry in the way that they've been handling the teaching. But something that the university as a whole can do is promote or foster on the faculty to change the way that they instruct the next 2 years. To make it more participative. I mean, a lot of students have been losing the social interactions in the last 1.5 years. And there are techniques, there are specific techniques that you do in the classroom that make everything more social interactions, and it's doing open discussions and doing other type of work, just kind of, try to try to you know, not relying too much on assessing a specific you know, exams and things like that, but make people interact more. There are specific techniques that teach us, right? So we don't apply that all the time because we also need to, for, you know, in some courses are more technical and stuff like that. But at least this is something that I could do, at least in my class, and then I can, you know, allow more open discussions, more stuff like that. And I think that, you know, if we do that, it's not that it's going to solve everything, but I think it will try to, you know, to make a better environment in the next 2 years of the pandemic for the students that have been suffering from this, right? So I don't know, what do you think about that?
I think that that's very true. Just having this contact with the students through the classrooms, and also in my experience, I've had great professors who have been very empathetic, but I know there's some that are not. And just teaching to be empathetic with the students and what they're going through is also very important, because, for example, 2 weeks ago, my brother and I got the vaccine, the second dose, and my brother had a very bad reaction to the vaccine, and he was hospitalized in the cardiology ICU for a week. And I spent the whole week there with my brother because it's only me and him. So I talked to my my professors and all, and I told them, like, hey, I will not be available for a couple days because I'm at the hospital. Like, I am on hospital mode. I am not thinking about the presentation that I have to do, the paper that I have.
Yeah, it's the last thing on your mind. The first thing is your brother.
Yeah, I'm not thinking about this. Like, don't talk to me. Don't look for me, because I am not, like, I'm not here. I'm in hospital mode. And it's very important for, like, professors to be empathetic of the situations that students are going through, because some students are like the breadwinners of the whole. Like, for me, I'm the one who works. I'm the one who pays the rent. I'm the one who pays all the bills. So if I don't work, nobody's gonna pay my bills, and my brother works, but he works at with less of the minimum wage, so he really can't pay the bills. Like, he gives a little, but, you know, it's a lot of responsibilities and a lot of pressure that comes with dealing with the pandemic and the consequences of the pandemic. And I feel like that's very important also for professors, for faculty and staff to, like, take notice of.
Yeah, and you really have a lot on your plate then. Like, apart from just being international, like, having to pay the rent and everything, that's just so much weight on your shoulders. I can't even imagine.
But also regarding what was it Carlos was saying, is also that we three are also part-time instructors too. So we can kind of both speak from the perspective of the grad student, but also from the perspective of the staff from the university, right? And something that throws me off is that when you are trying to be more engaging with your students, I was saying that in my breakout room, they seem to be plants because they don't want to talk, they don't want to interact, and so you are bringing their. You have to accommodate all your classes to online. You are trying to be more engaging, more funny, to also lighten up all a little bit the mood. And then you have students that just blindly stare at you all the time, and that is very frustrating also for the perspective.
You mean doing it online or face-to-face?
In both cases.
Okay.
Because if you are online, you see students that never turn off their cameras, they never unmute themselves, they don't even interact in the chat, and then you are just there for like an hour or 2 hours, being there without any input whatsoever. And most importantly for us, that is language classes, it doesn't make any sense that you are just giving their everything and they are not trying to produce, right? And then in in-person classes, I find that my students are either like online shopping, or they are just there. I have a couple of students that just fall asleep in class, you know, and that's also very hard because you don't want to be a burden for them, in the sense that you don't know what they are going through, but at the same time, they also take advantage of your flexibility. And sometimes they even lie to you, and you know that they are lying, but you don't know, you cannot prove that. So you have to like be more flexible with that too. I don't know if you have had that experience, but I have had that.
Well, I mean, I know my classes that I was mentioning are smaller, and you probably are teachers of big classes, and I can handle that more. Like I'm able to. I don't have TAs. I interact with the students, so I'm really glad that we're going face to face, because I can do that. But now I was thinking, you have 100 students, and they're all with the laptops out, they're doing whatever, they're not really engaged. You're trying to engage, they're not doing anything. It's frustrating for instructors, for everybody. So I mean, there are some things that we cannot do for them if they're doing some things that they shouldn't be doing while they're taking class. But we should at least give, for the people that are listening, the people that want to engage, we have to be there, and in the day we have to give them that space, right? So yeah, I will put more attention then on the people that you see that are engaging. Those are the ones that want to learn. I mean, that's my perspective.
And following what Christina and you were saying, for me it's extra difficult because my class is asynchronous, so I don't get to see them. I don't get to interact with my students, and the only way to interact with them is that they answer my emails or come to my office hours, which they don't. And I know there's one of them here. I see you, Jude. So come to my office hours. And it's very hard because you want to help them pass the class. You want to help them, do well in the class, but it's hard because you're trying to interact, but they won't talk to you back. And it's frustrating because at least Christina has that visual feedback in class, but I don't get that. And if they don't come to my office hours or email me, it's like, well, I guess you're gonna fail the class. I cannot do anything else for you.
Right. And I teach an asynchronous class as well. My class is very similar. Here more recently, I've been hosting live classes just to kind of go over the material that we're discussing. That way we can actually talk about it. If you have any questions, you can ask them at that time, because I feel like it's easier for students to be able to ask questions in a setting like that versus having to feel like they have to conform to all of the email etiquette. Good afternoon, how are you, blah, 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 hope you're well. Here's my question, thank you so much, da, da, da. Typically, I have 35 students in that class, and I'm lucky if I get 8 to show up.
Wow.
What's difficult about that is the fact that because it is an asynchronous course, my students are required to do 10 extracurricular activities or live classes throughout the semester in lieu of like an attendance grade, which most of them don't think that it's an actual thing. They think it's extra credit. And so I'm like, no, you actually have to go or attend something to write a reflection about it. But for, like I said, for my students, I feel like it's just really difficult to be able to teach a language course entirely asynchronously.
Yeah, I think that this conversation is showing us the way in which the sometimes liminal space of being a graduate student also gives you a privileged perspective in some ways. You are on both sides of the classroom. You know what it means to be a student and have these deadlines and all of these assignments. You also know what it means to be at the front of the classroom or the virtual classroom, strategizing and working for this engagement and trying to make accommodations. So I think that you all offer a really unique perspective in that sense. We have only 2 minutes left, and so I'd like to invite any final comments or questions regarding any aspects of this presentation or any further calls to action or things that came out of your conversations in breakout rooms.
Well, one of the things about like online classes is like for some classes it works. So for like my general psychology class, my American government and like politics, it works. But like my chemistry, I would love to have that in person. My statistics, would love to have that more in person, because I feel I can learn more with like in those classes in person.
I
It's
hate
like
statistics.
especially chemistry, because the only time we even like hear our chemistry professor is when we do recitation. And oh, you got it wrong. Oh, just look over that chapter again, and that's it.
Girl, I understand because I hated statistics and I actually failed statistics badly. And it was in person. I cannot imagine taking that class online. I seriously cannot. And for example, in
Girl,
our
you're making me
our-
decide to like drop it during the summer.
in our case with languages, it's very hard to teach a language online. I feel like it's super complicated.
Oh yeah, language. Mm-mm.